Celebrating our Native American brothers and sisters is an important thing this month and every month. So we want to do that and talk a little bit about the heritage and, of course, the significant history here in Illinois, here in Chicago, and also what are issues that are currently top of mind for Native Americans in our area. And I was honored to be asked to do this discussion because if you go back in my history, sharing with everyone. Okay, so this is my great great grandma Jackson, and we believe the lore is that she was Blackfoot Indian, but the family, or this part of the family, was actually from the um, Eastern Virginia. So we think it might actually be another tribe. But regardless, I know in a lot of African American families, there are stories about the mingling of communities with Native American communities. And so essentially, it's all of us. We are all one tribe. And we want to also just mention the significance here in the Chicago area and Midwest. According to the American Library Association, very interesting that Chicago has the largest urban American Indian population in the US. So that's really saying something, because you might think that that might be out in the West, but actually Chicago has a very significant history, as well as the original. Many consider this the original homeland to the Council of Three Fires, the Adowa, the Ajobi, and the Potawatomi nations, and the Illinois Confederacy, the Peoria and Kaskaskia nations, and that many of these and other tribes continue to call this area home, and celebrating the traditions, the history, the rituals, the culture, the rich culture in our area. So while some cannot necessarily trace their roots specifically, know that those roots are here. And we know the folks who are joining us have some specific connections who we're going to get to, but certainly the knowledge of Native Americans, American Indians, Indigenous people in our area. Today's town hall really probes deeper into the community's connection to our area, and to bring it current because of the significance of 2020, the challenges that we've had in 2020. I hope, and through these town halls, have helped us to maybe hear each other a little bit better. So we want to make sure that all voices are heard. And here in ABC7, this is why we're doing these town halls. Do you hear me? We want to hear you. Yes, we do, is the answer. So we hope that to learn something new as you hear from representatives from the community. We also want to hear about communities' current day concerns and challenges, including perspectives on politics, healthcare, business, popular culture. So those who've been watching these conversations, you know that they're unscripted. These are conversations. These are real live conversations. And I know many people have been having very real conversations these last few months with all that's been happening in the news. So we are just trying to continue that and really expand that conversation with this virtual format. So let's get to our guests, because they have so much to say, and do we hear you? Yes, we want to hear from you. Let's start with Blair Topash Caldwell, is of the Pakogan Band of Potawatomi Indians, has a PhD and is a Mellon Public Humanities Fellow within the Newberry Library's Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies. And also, if you could just wave so everyone knows who you are. Hello, hello. We also have Dr. Doreen Wiese. Dr. Wiese holds a doctorate degree in leadership and policy studies at Northern Illinois University, and is CEO of the American Indian Association of Illinois. Dr. Wiese, hello. Hello there in red. And Andrew Johnson, Executive Director of the Native American Chamber of Commerce of Illinois, which was created to support American Indian-owned Illinois businesses to expand and grow. Andrew, hello.
Well, yeah.
How did we guess? Though you're the last person and the last male. Um, but we want to get to several different things, and maybe Blair, you can start us off to talk a little bit about the history here and what the community looks like currently here in our area.
Well, I'm happy to introduce myself, but I think that this is a question better reserved for Dr. Risi, since she's been here so long and knows the urban Indigenous community in Chicago better than most. But I will say, as you've mentioned, I am a citizen of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. At present, our tribal lands are in southwestern Michigan and northern Indiana, but traditionally our homelands overlapped with Chicago, as well as other indigenous tribes, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Menominee, and others. And so if you'd like to start the conversation with the community today in the city of Chicago, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Weesey.
Dr. Risi, how does the community look today?
The community is very, very diverse. We have representatives from over 150 different tribes that live here, and we've had many tribes that have always lived here. Chicago has always been Indian country. There are thousands and thousands of years of information and artifacts and treaties. As Blair said, the Potawatomis were here, the Ojibwe people were here, the Odawa people were here. We were all part of that Three Fires Confederacy you mentioned, and a lot of the treaties that had to do with Chicago and Illinois had to do with our people. But before us, there were all kinds of other tribes as well. So it's fairly been a rich area for Native people because of the waterways and the trading routes and all of that. And Illinois has just always been a beautiful, beautiful place with water and forests and animals and everything that a person that people would love to live near. So and today, as I said, we're very diverse. We have so many people from so many tribes here, and large part of that is because of a law called the Relocation Act, and it followed the Termination Act, where the federal government tried to terminate all the rights of the American Indian tribes, and the idea was then to send them to cities where they would integrate and then no longer be American Indian people. But that did not happen, as Chicago and other big cities like Los Angeles and New York and Albuquerque, in Minneapolis, they received a lot of Indian people, but those people, many of them went back home to the reservations, and then other people followed them. And so again, it's just Indian people like to travel, so that history of us traveling between our reservation communities and urban areas has been ongoing. So there's been a renaissance in our Chicago Indian community since the 1970s, when there was some funding for urban programs and organizations. So a lot of the organizations, and we'll speak to those I'm sure later, came about during the middle 1970s, and they were created by American Indian people, and they were the very first such organizations that American Indian people created. We didn't have nonprofits or the kinds of governments that the U.S. government has, except that there's a lot that's been written about that really the Constitution and the Bill of Rights came from tribes such as the New York Kootenai tribes, who had developed their own type of government, which is similar to the U.S. government that we have today. So there's a lot of history. There's so much. It's so interesting, and we hope that this program will encourage people to read about all the stories of the people that are here, that have been here, and to learn more about American Indian people in the United States.
I'd just like to add that we need to understand the history of this state too, and how significant and vibrant the Native American community is here, because Illinois is one of the few states without any federally recognized tribes nor land. And that has been an issue with us as a community in dealing and working with the states and building an infrastructure here. And it really occurred back in the 19th century, the Treaty of Chicago, 1833, pretty much took care of any of the natives that were living here, causing their removal, and then the other wars prior to that. So from 1833 up until the Termination Relocation Acts and coming into the major metropolitan areas in the 1950s, we really feel like we have done a great deal and contributed to the state at all levels. We're very happy to be here and doing what we can to help our people and to help the state.
Part of the rich fabric of our area. And I think it is important to remember the history. I certainly remember in those watching, we learn about Native American history in school. But to Dr. Weesey's point, I wonder, how much was not part of what we learned, and what was omitted. So, Dr. Weesey, perhaps you can just give us a little summary too. I mean, the Treaty of the War of 1833, the significance, and what happened in terms of the movements of the tribes that were here, what happened to really change the landscape in Illinois for Native Americans forever.
Oh, there's been so much. We'd have to have a whole series
I
to go.
know.
But I think because we're starting kind of in the last treaty was 1833, as Andrew mentioned, and it was established to force all of Indian people west of the Mississippi. And so all the Indian people in the state were to leave, and there were some people that negotiated. And that treaty was with the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa. And so, and I don't think I mentioned that I'm Ojibwe. I'm White Earth Ojibwe from Minnesota, and so that's why my interest is in looking at Ojibwe history here as well. So that in that effort to push people out of the state, there were people who were from some of the tribes that negotiated with the local governments and were given land here. And that land is really the forest preserve. Many of the forest preserve lands were actually called reservations. And they have never been really ceded by the federal government or by the Native people families who own them. So that's a very interesting historic fact that that land still exists, and the history of that land and the people that were on it. And I know there are people that are writing and researching now about how that's related to our modern day history. But that was created a very difficult time for Indian people that had always lived here, that they could no longer live here. It followed the not too much before the Black Hawk War had taken place, and you've probably all heard of Black Hawk, but very few people know that he was a real person. He was a Sauk warrior, and in his late 50s, he found that his land was being overtaken by colonists, and so he decided to try to stop that, to protect his land, to protect his farms, to protect his family. And so very late in life, he decided to try to get groups of people to help him protect that land. But and that's a fascinating story all of in itself, the battles and the people that sided with him and the people that were against him. And it actually would make for a great movie. So we have people like Black Hawk who fought to keep his land here for his people, but he lost. And but he didn't take it too poorly. He continued his life. He became a wide-known speaker, as many of our chiefs have, and he lived to tell his story. And there actually is his biography is written. It's called Black Hawk. So that's another, there are children's books on that, and that's another part of history. And that's I think one of the main pieces of history that could be taught in the Chicago public schools today and the state of Illinois. Many states, such as Wisconsin, have a mandatory teaching of American Indian history, and we have none. We have the histories of people from all around the world whose histories are taught here. as part of units on genocide and as early history of the United States and all of that, but somehow our history has not been touched. So that is something here I think all of us on the program today would love to see American history and Indian history included in the classrooms today in Chicago and throughout the state. I don't know if you guys want to chime in on that. And
Yeah, I love that you talk about Black Hawk and sort of personalizing this history, because I think a lot of people they see indigenous communities in the past as tribes, as sort of like this mythical, nebulous concept of people who died and didn't have any leaders that made any meaningful impact in American history. And as you mentioned, we certainly did, both through some of our leaders who negotiated in some of these treaty agreements, as well as fighting alongside other European entities in the War of 1812 and other important battles, for which, if we didn't, things would have turned out a lot differently for the US. But just to draw a similar example, Leah, you asked about the Treaty of Chicago, 1833 Treaty of Chicago. So my tribe is called the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians because it's named after Leopold Pokagon, who was an important leader in our community in Michigan and in Indiana. And he was actually born Ojibwe, and he was adopted into Potawatomi. And his name Pokagon comes from Potawatomi word Pokagon, which is a rib. And our ribs, what they do is protect our internal organs in the same way that he protected his people. And so when treaties are brought up in curriculum, in the classroom, in broader society, they're often talked about in terms of these ethically dubious documents that were kind of brought to tribes to trick them into selling their land. And Indians didn't know any better, so they just went along with it. And of course, there are a lot of really ugly arrangements that were made, but we aren't often talking about treaties in terms of the important documents that they are the supreme law of the land, and not just about land loss. They're about agreements set into perpetuity, that the US had some agreements within these treaties, and that's what tribes these days are fighting to uphold. Now, Leopold Pokagon, to kind of digress a little bit, was a signatory on the Treaty of Chicago of 1833. And what he was able to negotiate is not being removed from our traditional homelands. Now, for thousands of years, tribes in different areas of the continent developed governance systems, highly complex governance systems. They buried their ancestors here. They learned how to farm here. They have ceremony here. Like, these are our places. So we're not trying to move west of the Mississippi like the US government was forcing so many tribes to do. Now, if you look at a map of the Potawatomi Nation today, you'll see a huge diaspora of different Potawatomi bands. You have the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi in Michigan, as well as Huron Band, Gun Lake. You also have Forest County Potawatomi in Wisconsin, Prairie Band Potawatomi in Kansas, and Citizen Band Potawatomi in Oklahoma. And why is that? It's because of that history of removal. And so because Leopold Pokagon was able to negotiate staying here in our original homelands, that's why the Pokagon Band is here today, because of that activism. So that's all I kind of wanted to add with that, is sort of personalizing it. It's just that when we think about ethnic studies or Black history or Indigenous history, what about Indigenous and Black present or Indigenous and Black futures? That the sort of histories that we're talking about are not just addendums to American history, but an integral part of how we exist today. So there's a lot of work to be done in adding to that curriculum as far as state mandates and such, so that we can get there one day.
So essentially you're here because of that agreement.
Yes, because of Leopold Pokagon's sort of agreements within the treaty. So yeah, but a lot of tribes were, ceded land within that treaty and were forced to move.
And just as a matter of education, and would like to suggest anybody watching this to contact any one of us that we give presentations and talk about the history of natives within the U.S. Within the state. The particular one that I do, I've titled "Everything You Know About American Indians Is Wrong." And actually, it's a tip of the hat to Paul Chait Smith, who's the curator at the National Museum of the American Indian. He wrote a book with that same name, and I didn't realize we were both the same. And I saw him and he said, "Okay, it's fine. It's still fine to use that." But at the end of those presentations, when you walk through it, this particular one goes through the 500 years of history. It sounds like a lot, but there are about 6 or 7 periods of relationships with the federal government. And it talks about natives in terms of federal Indian policy. And when you look at us within that 500-year time frame, you truly understand much more the native experience, how and why we are as we are, and it brings things out of that traditional stereotype there. I mean, how many of our history books bring up anything about Native Americans post 1890, anything past the 19th century? And there were significant acts and actions occurring in the 20th century and up through today that many people are not aware of, and it helps them understand us much better. And at the end of those presentations, invariably, people come out and do say, "Nobody ever taught me that in school. I wish we would have known. I understand so much more today than I did before." So there is really a gap within our educational system to truly understand our history and our current history too. What has happened in the last 50 years, and again, why we are as we are today. And we would love to get that word out much more.
Well, and I wonder what your thoughts are, because of some of the discussions the last few months, the last few years, places have been talking about reparations for African Americans. We've actually seen that in our area. Evanston offered reparations to African Americans because of perhaps this openness and this willingness to have some difficult discussions about our history, some very troubling times in our American history. What do you all think about the possibility of perhaps now might be an opportunity to, whether it's actual reparations, whether that's actually restoring land, restoring rights, or just the possibility of acknowledging wrongs and moving forward in a positive way?
Well,
I'd like
if
to
it's
say
go ahead, Andrew.
That was a loaded question, so I'm hoping all of you would like to share.
How we jump on this? That reparations, and I'll just say one thing, and I'll go over to you, Blair, in that. And I take this from my father. We're Cherokee. He was born and raised in Tahlequah. That's where our tribe was removed to, down in Oklahoma. But he said we don't need reparations, and that should not enter the conversation. We simply need the treaties to be honored and fulfilled. And Blair, I'll hand it over to you.
Absolutely, 100% agree. I think that even the Canadian government has received a lot of criticism for this reconciliation movement that occurred there over the past several years, because there cannot be reconciliation with Indigenous communities on stolen land. We first need to start from the basic agreements within treaties that outline our sovereign territory, that sometimes have continuous use clauses in certain areas for us to be able to gather in our traditional gathering places, get our medicines, get our food, hunt in the places that we've hunted for hundreds, if not thousands of years, have ceremony in places that we have not have had access to because now there's $1 million mansions on them. and the protection of private property as opposed to tribal sovereignty. So it always comes back to the importance of land. We are integrally connected spiritually, culturally, politically, linguistically to our homelands. And if we don't have access to them, then we can't continue to be a people, at least not in the same way. I always bring it back to my language, for example. Land is so integrated into our knowledge systems, into our identity, that the way that we use the word to teach or to learn is kenomage. And that beginning part, ke, refers literally to the land, because you can't learn anything, I guess, is the philosophy, unless you have access to land and you're learning while you're on the land. Whether that's learning how to pick medicines, or learning how certain animals move around and how to survive in certain areas. And so the last sort of thing I'll leave you with is that I would highly encourage your audience to do more investigation about the lands that they call home. Whose tribal community, or what tribe calls that home? And sometimes it's multiple tribes, and the information changes a little bit from time to time. There's great resources out there. For example, nativeland.ca. And of course, there's a lot of issues with it. Some tribes don't always agree on the sort of boundaries that are delineated in this map, but it's a great starting place to kind of see, like, oh, wow, I didn't know Michigan had, 12 tribes represented here, or I didn't know Chicago was originally part of the Three Fires Confederacy. And so you can kind of see where your hometown, your state, what are the boundaries that the just under 600 federally recognized tribes today have called home, and as well as historical tribes, because even the name of Chicago and the city itself comes from Anishinaabe, which is a language spoken by multiple tribes, including Dr. Reese's tribe and myself. And the spelling changes, the pronunciation changes a little bit, but for us in Potawatomi, we call it Chicagoinak, which is the place of wild leeks or wild onions. The Miamia call it that too. Of course, it's spelled completely different, but it does also refer to the place of wild leeks. So these place names, these words that people use on a day-to-day basis, Michigan, Chicago, Wisconsin, all of these place names are a lot of times coming from indigenous languages, and they mean something. And it's associated with the type of activities that would have been conducted there. So just seeing the land as an archive of indigenous knowledge is an important step too. So I'm happy to share resources after the program as well, if people want to continue their own research.
And hopefully people will, because I think that there, as all of you have said, there's a large gap in our history, and perhaps now, as people are searching for more understanding for people and different ethnicities, perhaps they will seek out more information. And the there have been several mentions, and Dr. Wiese, I'm hopefully you can give us some insight. I know that you can give us some insight, but you've mentioned, all of you have mentioned the Council of Three Fires. Just what does that mean? What is the significance?
It was a confederation of Native people who all spoke a similar language, an Algonquian language, which is Anishinaabe, or it's referred to by many different names, and in the treaties we were called the Chippewa people. And there are all kinds of reasons for that, variations of how the words were interpreted by early missionaries and explorers, and all of that. So throughout history, Native people have formed groups to protect themselves, and this was important for our people, the Anishinaabe, because we were moved from the east, and we have a lot of oral history about our movement from the east and the significance of that, and that we were told by our that by the creator and spirits that we were to do that or we would be destroyed. And it is definitely what was happening with Native people on the East Coast. They were the first hit by smallpox and other diseases. In fact, most of our people, over 90%, were destroyed through disease. and either intentionally or by accident. So, and then the rest, we lost many more of our people through dislocation. We talked a little bit about that. There was a constant movement by presidents such as Andrew Jackson and presidents before him of moving our people across the land, back and forth, marching them. The Cherokee walk, the Navajo walk, the walks of the Potawatomi, the walks of the Ho-Chunk is one of the most incredible stories I've ever read. They were marched through 5 different states. They had 5 different relocations. They were down to 120 people. That's all existed of all their people in the whole world. And they came back from that. And when you think about that, most of us are really survivors of the greatest genocide of the world. That with so many people, so many tribes that we talked about have been destroyed. No one even knows how many tribes there were exactly before before this carnage began. And that's all connected also to where people were protesting Columbus and Columbus Day. It's connected to that realization that that story's not told about what happened when the explorers began to come to different countries and how they enslaved the people. They murdered them. It was similar that they were captives. Native people were the first captives here, the slaves before African people. And so we understand really a great deal about what happened with slavery. And so there's just again, there's so many interesting stories about those confederacies, about people grouping together, about African free slaves who lived with people in the East. Many intermarried with the Seneca and the Oneida and the Mohawks on the East Coast and in other areas of the country as well. There were movements to help freed slaves throughout the North among Native people. And I think they were just, it was wonderful that they were able to live peacefully together and to work together to survive. And so the Three Fighters Confederacy was similar to that, and it's actually in the treaties we were called the United Nations of the Chippewa, Potawatomi, and Odawa. And the Chippewa are mentioned first because we were the grandfather. We were the largest of the groups. Today, even in Chicago, the Ojibwe Chippewa are the largest tribe here. And we have probably over 300 different bands, kind of as Blair was saying. There's bands that all over the Midwest and in Canada. Many of our people live in Canada. It's the same tribe, same language, and but we have different communities of tribes. So that's a great history too to look at all the places that Ojibwe people live.
I love all of these history lessons. And there is so much to talk about. And I'm wondering, we just had what some call Columbus Day and other people call Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm wondering, even in just that awareness, in kind of modern day culture, whether some of you are seeing a kind of shift to appreciate some of this history, some of this really difficult history.
Yeah, it's incredible that this remains such a controversy. Columbus Day, in the grand scheme of things, has not existed as a holiday or federally recognized holiday for very long, yet people are very attached to it. And considering that it's after an individual that never set foot on this continent is also kind of embarrassing, I would think. And so Indigenous Peoples Day is definitely a rebuttal to that, but it's also a refusal to be erased. It's a refusal to be irrelevant within the American conversation and what's considered something to celebrate. And so one, I guess, clarification that I'd like to make on the historical figure that is Christopher Columbus is also just that when we say him and his entourage enslaved and murdered the Taino people that he came into contact with, I think a lot of people have this place in their subconscious where they say, okay, but that's the past. That's sort of what, Europeans did back then, or different explorers, and they're just a product of their times. But if you look at some of the correspondences as well as his own personal journals, he was criticized by the rest of the world for the actions that he took. He wasn't just a product of his time. So we're continuing to celebrate someone who's on par with someone like Adolf Hitler. Like, why doesn't he have statues in Germany? Because he's not something to celebrate, not something to be proud of. And this idea that, well, if he didn't come into the Caribbean, America wouldn't have been discovered, but you can't discover something where people are already living. So just wanted to sort of answer that question in that way.
I just want to make sure that we separate, the individual Columbus and he as a person and as a symbol from the Italian Americans that are here. We're very proud of them, of their accomplishments, of what they have contributed to this. And it really is something different when we speak of that particular individual came here versus the Italian Americans that reside in Chicago. We're very, very happy, very proud. Some of my best friends are Italian. And so want to make sure that we celebrate them, but absolutely recognize the issues around the individual Columbus himself and what his presence set forth and the impact it had on us as Native Americans here.
Well, and I guess I was getting at the Dr. Weesey, hopefully if you can get to this, just the shift in looking at it, that some people, instead of celebrating Columbus, as some had been doing for so many years, now it's a celebration of Indigenous people, those who were here, before they were discovered.
Well, it's so important, I think, and this is an issue that would be solved with education. If students were taught this in the schools and the colleges and universities, we wouldn't be having this discussion now. It would be resolved. And also, it's much broader than, as we talked about, it's really almost like a worldwide issue. It's not just about the United States. It's about Puerto Rico and the East Indies and the people around the world that encountered explorers, if not Columbus and explorers like him. So what happened? And we don't know that. We were never taught that in school. I think my first protest when I came to Chicago in 1967 was about Columbus Day. So you can see how long it's taken, and nothing has really moved that much. It hasn't changed. But we knew that then, as young people, as college students, we were beginning to learn, and we wanted some acknowledgement of what true history was. So I think that's, again, and also that we need to recognize that there are 450 million Indigenous people in the world. We're not just talking about the United States when we talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. We're talking about all of those people that are indigenous to their homeland and that need to be recognized and appreciated. And we see that the UN, established criteria and resolutions to help protect people, because all over the world, their lands are being taken. They're being overtaken by illness and disease. They're having difficulty maintaining a healthy life because they can't plant and eat the foods that they have for centuries and centuries been used to eating. So we have all of these. They are forbidden in their schools from speaking their languages. This is not just. I think what is great about when you study United States American Indian history is you realize that this kind of oppression and genocide has been going on around the world. We're just a microcosm here. We can see it closer because this is our country. But really, when you look at it, all the indigenous people around the world, it's repeated time and time and time again. And that's what we're trying to stop, because as Blair was talking about the land, our history is entwined with that of the land, of Mother Earth, of all the resources, of water, of air. We cannot live without water. Our people have not really grasped that yet. That our water, where there's no clean water left in the entire planet, it does not exist. And so as we look at the needs, we look at climate change. Native people have been talking about this since the beginning of, colonization, that we know that we need land and water and food, and that it comes from our Mother Earth. It doesn't come from a factory. It doesn't come from a chemistry lab. And so those are the things, again, those are probably the main way in which our what we need and want overlaps with what the United States, the other citizens of the United States need and want are the natural resources to survive, and then a concern for the environment and for climate change. We have to all be aware of that because the time is now getting short for us to really to turn the tide on many of these of those needs.
And while all of you are with me having this discussion, I'm very cognizant that our governor is talking about the rise in COVID cases. We just had Mayor Lightfoot ask for a stay at home for the next 30 days, and we know how disease played a role in all of the tribes' histories to bring us current. How is COVID impacting Native Americans in our area as well as on some of the reservations?
In Chicago, and I'm chairman of the American Indian Health Services board here in Chicago, and we've been doing COVID testing for about 3 months and working with people who have gotten ill and that kind of thing, and also doing testing in the general community. We received some state funding to do COVID testing and antibody testing. And I'm going to give a little commercial here. They're located on West Montrose Avenue near the expressway, and they give free COVID testing 4 days a week. So we're happy to announce that. But generally, since we've been doing COVID testing, the rate for American Indians is higher than Chicago in general. The rate has been between 15 and 20%. And that's kind of across the country. You've seen that among the tribes where it's been higher than the urban populations in general, the general population. So while there was a lot of talk in Chicago about the different neighborhoods that had higher percentages of COVID positive testing, we were among those, but really didn't receive a lot of publicity on that. So we've been coping with that. With some, as I said, some assistance with both our Indian Health Service and from the city and from the state as well. So we're holding our own. We're keeping the death rate down by seeing that people stay home. That we're encouraging everyone early on. We distributed masks. Both my organization, American Indian Association of Illinois, and also American Indian Health Services distributed masks as soon as they got them. So masks, hand sanitizers, cleaning supplies. We did a mass giving out of cleaning supplies for our elders in our community because they are our historians, and we wanted to make sure that they were safe because also COVID was hitting people over age 60 harder than others. So it's been a struggle, but we're maintaining, and I'm happy to say that things are going well. Probably one of our biggest challenges are data. The tribes and the urban areas had great difficulty with getting their data back from agencies like the CDC and other agencies who were not willing to share our own data back to us. And here were clinics and sometimes tribal hospitals trying to serve a population, and we can't get accurate national data or data trends. So this was complicated and hard because I don't know if any of your people at ABC heard about the CNN Safa, where they did a chart of voters and they called us something else as a group, as a racial group. And I think that was it was both it was kind of typical. I follow data all the time, and if you look at data, you'll see that often we're completely left out, or most often we're called other. So it was kind of hilarious, and the Indian country took it up and made a lot of jokes about it, that we were something else. But and at the end of the day, it's not humorous.
No.
that we can't get our data and that people don't recognize that this is our country. This is where we come from. This is where all of the people who came here after us, they came to our country. This is all Indian land. Was Indian land, is Indian land. Our ancestors are all buried underneath this ground. Wherever you live, it's possible you have Native people buried underneath your house. And so people need to understand that they can't just ignore us. I always say, you would not go to Africa and completely not talk about Black Africans. Imagine that you went there and you only saw white Africans. What would you think? It would be bizarre. It would be surreal. It would just be so upsetting. You know, if you were a Black African, you're going, well, where's my face?
Mhm.
And so that's what we face on a day-to-day basis. And then the data is where it becomes really dangerous because by not people not seeing us in the data, they think, as Blair was talking about before, that we don't exist. And as Andrew was saying, that we only existed, you know, before the 19th century, and that we still live in teepees, we ride on horseback, we wear war bonnets. That's totally untrue. All the people you're seeing here, we're real Indians, and we live in houses and apartments, and we drive cars. And I don't think anybody here has a war bonnet because it's mainly a piece of honor that is gained by warriors. And so there are so much that people can learn about us and from us, and it's so important. And again, COVID is another one of those things that is hitting all of us equally, but some of us are being hit harder.
Well, and certainly that disparity in the healthcare data, that has very deep connection to the disparity in healthcare and disparity in resources, correct? But
Yes.
you did mention the politics. We just went through this election. By some accounts, we're still going through it. Just how are you all feeling about how your voices are heard or not heard as part of this political process?
Well, I think we have to look at it on a national and a state level. On a national level, we do have Native Americans that are members of Congress. I guess two ladies that were hauling, and you're going to shoot me because the names don't come right off the top of my head. Two Democrats and then a couple of Republicans, Mark Mullen, Tom Cole out of Oklahoma. So there is representation, and it goes down the line. But as we look at Illinois, we don't have any Native American legislative officers there, elected positions, and we would like to do something about that. That with other states, you have Native American policy commissions that are established and reports to the governor, have regular meetings and contact updates and that. We don't have something like that here. We would like to get that established. And at the state level, at the county level, and at the city local levels too. We were fortunate last year with the Illinois Native American Employment Plan Act that was passed and was signed by Governor Pritzker. It passed 57-0 in the Senate, and I think it was 161-1 in the House. Well, we've got our eye on that one individual. I won't tell you who it is, but we are pleased. We've just had the appointment of some of the individuals for the council from the governor, and we'll start working on that, meeting regularly. So just in terms of from an employment side and participation, that there are over 46,000 state employees. There are 186 that are Native American. And so that's what this particular law is going to help us to address. And we look forward to engaging with them. But there is, within our state, there's a lot that we have to do. I don't want to come across as a victim or we're owed something. We simply wish the opportunity and we'll do whatever we can to ensure that we are there and become even more part of the community and part of the state.
And I'm just looking at some of the comments. Kimberly, Casey, a lot of folks watching right now, Sandy and Renee, Jamie, thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments. And mainly the comments that I'm seeing as I'm just looking down occasionally just to see what's being said, to make sure we're covering things that people want to hear. People are grateful. They're grateful to hear this part of the history that they didn't see in their history books, that they're very much open to now. So I want to make sure that we get to what do you think is most important for people to know about your tribe, about Native Americans in general? I just want to make sure we have enough time for each of you to really articulate what you think is significant about your history and your current. So I'll go around to each of you. Blair, do you want to share? You've shared a little bit about the band and its history. What else? What do you think people should know?
I think what it really boils down to is that I'd love for people to know that we are still here, that we weren't, we didn't disappear in history. And then just to add on to that, that we are tribal nations, that we're not just like a special interest ethnic group that gets special rights from the government, that we operate as sovereign nations, that we often have our own passports to travel internationally. We have our own constitutions, we have our own governing bodies. And so when we talk about tribal rights and we talk about land rights and tribal sovereignty, what we're talking about is jurisdiction. And what we're talking about is the right to govern ourselves and to determine our own futures. And so it's okay if people don't know every single thing there is to know about Indians or about the tribes in their area. Of course, I would highly encourage people to continue their learning journey about people other than themselves, other than the community that they identify with. But it's just to know that we are here, we're present, we are sovereign, and that we will be in the future as well.
Andrew, how about you? What do you think is important for people to understand about your tribal history and what's going on currently?
I think I echo definitely what Blair said, but also want to bring up, since I'm with the Native American Chamber of Commerce, we have some wonderful, wonderful Native American businesses here and would truly like to have you engage with them. We have an entire list on our website at nacc-il.org. Please go online and look at them and engage with them. And our peoples, the companies go all across the gambit in terms of the sizes of their businesses and quite a breadth in terms of the industries too. So from high-level professional consulting to window washing maintenance, to construction, to manufacturing. Please go online and engage with them, and you will be helping the community, those natives, those families to grow, and again, be more part of this vibrant community of Illinois itself.
And I will be talking with you because I have been focusing on small business survival during this pandemic. So I'm happy to hear about some of the stories of some of those businesses on that list. And Dr. Wiese, there is so much to be learned. What are some things that you think are important that people know about Native American history and Native American present?
Oh, there's so much. I think, as Blair was saying, that we are currently here. There are thousands of us. Most Indian people live in cities like Chicago. My organization, the American Indian Association of Illinois, is an educational nonprofit. We also have ways in which we share culture and history with the Chicago general population through our Black Hawk Performance Company, which is made up of children, many from the CPS public schools, who share their dance and music with the city. And also, I'm in charge of a Chicago Museum Without Walls, where I and other people give talks and present art that is created in the Chicagoland area. So those are some of the ways that we also have another organization called NACE, which has a local archives and library. And so we have ways in which we share those materials and things with the general population. So I think it's an ongoing that we're all ready and we want to, we're interested in sharing what we know with the city at large. Please, when you see programs like this, I hope that more people will tune in, that they'll call us, as Andrew said, look us up on our website. You can Google my name and find me easily. And I think that we have, just so people know, we have no really wealthy area of our community, so that people are always looking for donations, and they really will help our nonprofit survive in the months to come. And so that's an important priority for us. And you see us on Giving Tuesday, please consider donating. And I just want to thank you, Leah, for the wonderful programming, this opportunity today. And I hope we'll see other programs in the future, because we have many other people that also could come on and speak to your audience.
There is so much more to learn, and I have appreciated this. I know just in my family, obviously my mother, and so this is my great grandma Jackson. So we think she was part of the Powhatan Nation in the Tidewater region of Eastern Virginia near the Rappahannock River. As you were talking about, Dr. We see, obviously the tribes were near waterways and very connected to the land. So I feel really privileged to have this discussion. My family, we talked about different cultures, and obviously Native American cultures and Native American history. And one of the big takeaways that I've heard from all of you is the importance of teaching this history in a very real way. And making it part of the curriculum for all of our young people. And the other thing that I heard Dr. Weesey say that this is Indian land. This is here. And so when I go out in my garden and I see the wild onions growing, every time I see them, I will think about this conversation and think about our connectedness to the land and this history. We have just a couple more minutes left. As November is Native American Heritage Month, what are some ways which we can celebrate and honor the ancestors?
I would say one thing that comes to mind, and again, Andrew had provided some great ideas as far as supporting Native businesses. I would also say a particularly big issue for Natives is how we're represented by Hollywood, or problematically represented. And so just really checking out Indigenous made film. I know that Amazon Prime is offering free access to a host of Native films that you can check out, ranging from serious topics to lighthearted topics. And so just expanding people's repertoire about what Indian life is like, what our cultures are like, I think is a really fun way to educate oneself and celebrate Native American Heritage Month.
How about you, Dr. Weesey? How would you like to see people celebrate this month?
I guess and honor the land and the water and the foods that they eat, especially during Thanksgiving. There are traditional foods. Food is very interesting. Take a look at where your food comes from and what foods were indigenous to this area, and celebrate that and remember the tribes and the people that have lived here and do live here. And I think that's a good way to recognize that we still exist and that we have many commonalities. And I also want to echo what Blair said about the movies. I mean, there's so many great films today, and it'll help people erase from their minds the stereotypes that they have seen from mascots and other images that are totally untrue about us. So I hope that people have a great month and learning more about us.
We didn't even get to the whole mascot names. We could do a whole session on that. But we've come a long way. Dr. Doreen Weesey, Blair Tokash Caldwell, and Andrew Johnson. Thank you for having this discussion. Thank you for sharing this rich history and helping us to celebrate. Thank you, all of you who are watching and commenting and continuing to be part of this conversation here on ABC 7. So we wish you a wonderful afternoon. Please, everyone, be safe, wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your social distance so we can continue having these conversations. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wado.
Much. Thank you.
Quick.
I'm going to share that list, the Chamber of Commerce. Andrew, make sure you send that to me. I'll put that on my
I will.
Facebook page.
Yes.
All right. Very good. Very good. Thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Boy, that went by fast.
Doesn't it? There's so much
Yes,
to talk about. There's
Yeah.
absolutely so much to talk about, and and I wonder